The lipids are known as the fats and oils that we see in our everyday life. So they are mostly hydrophobic, meaning that they are non-polar. They do not react well in water. Do not react well in water. They do not get mixed in water. So they consist mostly of hydrocarbons in their chain. So lipids in their chain, they are mainly consisting of hydrocarbons, the hydrogen bonded to carbons. That is the ones that are dominating in the lipids chain. So they are one of the most important function is for their useful long-term energy. So they are able to store we have different types of lipids. We have what is known as the fatty acids. We have the triglycerides. This is called the fatty acid here. Then we have the triacylglycerols. We have the phospholipids, which are also known as the phosphoacylglycerols. We have the steroids. We have the waxes. We have the eicosanoids. Okay. So let's look at each lipid separately. We have firstly the fatty acid. A fatty acid is a lipid, right? So it's the basic unit of a lipid. It is known to be a basic unit of a lipid. So the fatty acid, it consists of both the hydrophilic and hydrophobic. You understand? So it has the hydrophilic and the hydrophobic. We can say that the fatty acid is known to be amphipathic. So because it consists of both the hydrophilic and the hydrophobic parts, right? So where do we find these hydrophilic and the hydrophobic on the fatty acid, right? So a fatty acid can be something like this. This is the structure of a fatty acid. Can be a fatty acid, right? So you need to note down that a fatty acid consists of a carboxyl group, right? So it consists of a carboxyl group, right? So we find the hydrophilic part here. We find the hydrophilic here. So meaning that is the water part of the fatty acid. The water part, that is a polar part of the fatty acid. Only here, that is when you see your fatty acid being hydrophilic. Then on the rest of the chain, on the hydrocarbon chain, that is where it is the hydrophobic part. So this is a non-polar side, or the non-polar part. So in this case, you need to know that this part is the one that do not mix well with water. So that is why we are saying that a fatty acid is hydrophilic and hydrophobic. It consists of both hydrophilic and hydrophobic. You need to note down that we have two types of the fatty acid. We have the saturated fatty acid. We also have the unsaturated fatty acid. So when we are talking about saturated fatty acid, they mostly found in animal fats. So they are found in animal fats. They are solid at room temperature. They are solid at room temperature. And also, you need to note down that due to this solidation at room temperature, they have a higher melting point. And also, they have a maximum number of hydrocarbons. The saturated fatty acid, they have a maximum number of hydrocarbons. Hydrogen bonded carbon, right? So in this case, it's not going to be difficult to pick up this kind of fatty acid because it also consists of single bonds. There is no way in the structure whereby there is a double or a triple bond. So the saturated fatty acid, they consist of a single bond. So the main things that I have mentioned, the solid at room temperature as well as the maximum number of hydrogen. So this is the explanation. It explains the physical properties of saturated fatty acid at the room temperature. A question may arise and say that, please or briefly explain the physical properties of the saturated fatty acid at the room temperature. You have to make sure that in this case, you mention things such as the saturated fatty acid are solid at room temperature, whereby they have a higher melting point and they have a maximum number of hydrogen carbon or hydrocarbon, whereby you can be able to pick up the structure easily, and also it consists of a single bond. So this is what you need to mention when this kind of a question is being asked in an exam, which is common, right? So you also need to know that we have examples of the saturated fatty acid, the common examples of this saturated fatty acid, right? I'm sorry for that. We have what is known as the palmitic acid. Palmitic acid. A palmitic acid is a 16 carbon molecule, which is also known as the hexadecanoic acid. The hexadecanoic acid. So this molecule is an example of a saturated fatty acid. It consists of a single bond, and also it has a higher melting point. We also have what is known as a stearic acid. So the stearic acid is an 18 carbon molecule, whereby it is also known as the octadecanoic acid. The octadecanoic acid. So these two acids are the examples of saturated fatty acid. So they get their data resources from they can be obtained from the cheese, the butter, the coconut oil, and etc. You understand? So the high intake of this saturated fatty acid, or when this saturated fatty acid are consumed in excess, they lead to an increased risk of heart diseases. And the main reason to this is because of the raising LDL cholesterol levels. So the LDL cholesterol levels are known to be the bad cholesterol levels, or the bad cholesterol actually, right? So if you consume this saturated fatty acid from the cheese, from the butter, from the coconut oil, then that is when you're going to be having the increased risk of these heart diseases, right? So let's look at the unsaturated fatty acids. So when we are talking about the unsaturated fatty acid, we mainly refer to the acids that are liquid at room temperature. They have a lower melting point. You understand? So we are talking about the fatty acid that consists of a double bond. My marker is not of a double bond. So we have different types of unsaturated fatty acid. We have the monounsaturated fatty acid as well as the polyunsaturated fatty acid. So when we talk about the monounsaturated And we also have the poly. We have the mono and the polyunsaturated fatty acid. So when we are referring to the monounsaturated fatty acid, they consist of only one double bond in their structure. Only one double bond in their structure. Right. So, and due to this bond in the structure of a monounsaturated fatty acid, it causes the structure to have a kink, causing the whole molecule, the whole structure to bend. You understand? It causes the whole molecule or to bend. So let's look at a structure of monounsaturated fatty acid. It can be something like this. So it causes the double bond here can cause a kink, causing this whole structure to bend, right? So, and the main examples of this monounsaturated fatty acid, we have what is known as the oleic acid is an example of, or is a common example of this monounsaturated fatty acid. So the oleic acid is a 18 carbon molecule whereby it have a double bond on carbon number 9, right? So remember that an 18 carbon molecule is known as an octadecanoic acid. So this thing consists of a what? Of a double bond at carbon number 9. Right. So, but then when we are speaking about the polyunsaturated fatty acid, we are mainly referring to the fatty acid that consists of 2 double bonds in their structure. And that include the omega-3 and the omega-6 fatty acid, which one must obtain from their diet because the body cannot synthesize those kind of acid. That's omega-3 and omega-6, right? So you need to note that this polyunsaturated fatty acid, they are generally taken as beneficial for the heart health overall. And therefore, specifically the omega-3 fatty acid is known to be or to have the ability to lower the risk of the chronic diseases, including the heart and the arthritis diseases, as well as reducing the inflammations. So it is one of the very good acid, this, because it lowers the increase of or the risk of the heart diseases. Have what is known as the delta notation. You may be asking yourself that what is this delta notation? Why are they always putting the delta notation in some of the scientific names of this fatty acid? The delta notation, it's mainly, or you're going to be mainly seeing it in the unsaturated fatty acid because it represents the position of a double bond. So it represents the position of a double bond, right? So for an example, you can be given the oleic acid or the lanoic acid. The lanoic acid is known as the omega-6 fatty acid, right? So you can be given the oleic acid. The oleic acid is 18. It has 18 carbon and it also have one double bond, right? So you can be given it as like this. Delta 9, the octadecanoic acid. So this 9 here, it mainly represent the delta 9 here represent that the lanoic acid, it consists of a double bond or one double bond at carbon number 9. So it represents the position of a double bond. You can be given the lanoic acid and they write that there is a delta 12 and 9, meaning that there is a double bond at carbon number 9 and there's also a double bond at carbon number 12. So that is the main purpose of this delta notation, right? We also have what is known as the omega notation. So the omega notation, it indicates the position of the first double bond from the methyl group of the fatty acid. You understand? So the indication of the first double bond position from the methyl group of from the fatty acid chain. So for example, we have what is known as the alpha linoleic acid, whereby the alpha linoleic acid, it then known as the omega-3, and we also have the linoleic acid, which is also known as the omega-6. That's how it is. We have the different types of the dietary fats. We have what is known as the good fats, the bad fats, as well as the really bad fats. When we are speaking about the good fats, is that they promote a good cholesterol levels, right? And also they reduce the risk of heart diseases, and strokes, or as well as the inflammations. So they also consist of the antioxidant properties. They help to control the blood sugar levels, and they are mostly commonly found on the polyunsaturated sources. So mostly in the sunflower, the olive oil, the almonds. That is when you're going to be finding the good fats. So the bad fats, they raise a very bad cholesterol. The HDL cholesterol start to go up, right? So they raise the HDL cholesterol. So they raise it, and they also increase the risk of heart diseases and strokes if you consume them in excess. So in this case, you need to make sure that you consume them in moderate. The bad fats, you need to make sure that you consume them in moderate. So this one are mostly commonly from the saturated fatty acid, butter, the cheese. So when you are consuming the butter and the cheese, you need to make sure that you consume in moderate, because they are the one that causes the raising of the bad cholesterol. So we have the really bad fats, which these ones are really not good, right? They come from the trans fatty acid, and they are usually have to be avoided as much as possible because of their implication of the heart health overall. You understand? So these ones are very bad, right? So they increase, I'm sorry, this one is the LDL. So they increase the LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, and then they decrease the HDL, the good cholesterol. So they are mostly coming from the hydrogenated fatty acid that we find in some of the margarine. So you need to make sure that when you consume the margarine, you consume that, or you look at the type of margarine that you're consuming, because it consists of really bad fatty acid. You understand? But let's look at the second lipid, which is also known as the TAGs, the triacylglycerols or the triglycerides. So this kind of lipids, they are commonly found in some foods and in the body. Their main function is for their long-term energy storage, and can be stored in adipose tissue. Actually, it cannot be stored. It is being stored in adipose tissues or adipose cells and be activated when needed. So these triacylglycerols, they are being stored in these adipose cells, and then they are going to be activated when needed, when the energy is needed. You understand? So when the energy is being needed, they are the ones that's going to be entering the mitochondrion and be able to perform some oxidation for the generation of the ATP, which is the energy, right? So this is a process that we are going to be explaining when we come to the transport of the fatty acid into the mitochondria, as well as the oxidation of fatty acid. So how are these triacylglycerols being formed? So the triacylglycerols are being formed from the glycerols esterified or combined with the 3 fatty acid, which can vary in length and the degree of saturation. So by saying that, we mean that they can be different or they can be similar, right? They can be simple or they can be complex. Understand? So in this case, we're going to have a glycerol. Glycerol is a 3-carbon molecule. So let me just put it like this. This glycerol. This is a glycerol. This is a glycerol. So it gets being added with 3 fatty acid. So let me just say we're going to have R. So this is the 3 fatty acid, right? So there is esterification of this glycerol and the 3 fatty acid. This one can be saturated, it can be monounsaturated, it can be polyunsaturated, or they can be saturated, all of these 3. So it depends, right? So this leads to the formation of 3 water plus the triacylglycerol plus the TAGS. So this type of reaction is known to be the dehydrogenation or dehydration synthesis reaction, right? So it is being facilitated by an enzyme known as a lipase enzyme. So this reaction is also reversible. The water plus TAGS, they can form the glycerol plus 3 fatty acid by the reaction being called the hydrolysis reaction, because there is going to be the splitting of water here. So this reaction is very much reversible. So we also have the different types of the triacylglycerols that can be formed. They can be a simple triacylglycerol. They can also be a complex triacylglycerols. So this is mainly depending on the types of fatty acid that are being added to the glycerol in the formation of the triacylglycerols. Can be similar or they can be different. So this depend on the type of the fatty acid or that is being added to the glycerol. And another thing about the glycerol, the triacylglycerols, is that how do I say?